Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Karker Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis as well as personal response and discussion for how these chapters connect to the rest of the series. As usual, we'll start these videos with a reading of the chapter that we are currently on. This chapter is Chapter 57, July Rain, Interrupted. Pain. Heaviness, cold, hurts, bleeding, won't stop, blood. The rain has stopped. This is Bleach, Chapter 57, July Rain, Interrupted. It doesn't hurt? Uh-oh, am I finally dying? Is that why the pain stopped? But the cold I felt before is gone. I feel kinda warm. Warm. Hi. Ah! A quick response. Very good. You're too close. Boss, Mr. Kurosaki is awake. I've seen you before. You're one of Hattenclog's people. What are you doing on top of me? Get off! Ah! What? I'm not dead. Why not? Wait, this isn't my house. Where am I? No, Mr. Kurosaki. Your wounds have barely closed. If you move around too much, you'll die. Hattenclogs. So this is your house? Yes. Did you save me? What? You sound upset. Didn't you want to be saved? Hey, Uryu is lying here too. What happened to him? Is he here? He went home. His wound bled a lot, but it wasn't severe. It would have taken him 2 days to die if we'd left him there. So I was able to heal him on the spot. He seemed worried when we were leaving about you. Uryu? Me? No way. I asked him to rest here, but... Thank you for the offer, but I'm fine. But please, take care of Ichigo. Right now, if anybody has a chance of beating them, it isn't me. Tell Ichigo I wish him a swift recovery. Because the only one who can save Rukia is him. Me, huh? What am I supposed to do? Rukia went back to the Soul Society. How am I supposed to get there? How can I save her? No way, I can't do it. Do you really think there's no way to get to the Soul Society? Well, is there? How? How can I get there? Tell me. I'll tell you under one condition. For the next 10 days, you must allow me to train you. Sheesh. You're gonna teach me how to fight? There's no time for that. Who knows when they might decide to kill Rukia? Right now we gotta... You don't understand. What I'm trying to tell you is, they'll kill you. Could you win? If you fought them again as you are. I allowed you to fight them this time because I thought it would make it easier for you to understand. What's the sensation? Like the point of a sword hovering over me. At your current level of ability, you wouldn't stand a chance in the Soul Society. You're weak. For you to venture into enemy territory now would be suicide. You want to save Miss Kuchiki? Don't make me laugh. Don't use her as an excuse to kill yourself. Soul Society. generally waits 1 month before executing a Kyokushu, a capital offender. That should hold true for Miss Kuchiki as well. 10 days to abuse you, 7 days to open the gates of Soul Society, and 13 days for you to save her. We have plenty of time. Can I get strong enough in just 10 days? Of course. If you wish to save Miss Kuchiki with your whole heart, then you have at your disposal a power stronger than iron. But if your resolve is half-hearted, forget it. For the next 10 days, I'm going to put you through the ringer. Well, if I don't do this, there's nobody else who can, right? Alright, let's do it. The rain has stopped. That scared me. He suddenly came and took Ichigo's body. And that is it for this chapter of Bleach. This has been chapter 57. I will get back to the very beginning of it, and then we can overshot it, as I usually do. You try to click through this, but again, if I actually click it with my mouse, I might accidentally minimize the program, and that's no good, because then I have to spend more time cutting together the video to render it, or just starting the recording over again. Anyway, let's talk about this chapter. Let's talk about chapter 57, doing a little bit of analysis of both the art and the narrative and how they help move along the series and how they're functioning, right? So I do like that we get these kind of interspersed moments of Ichigo in the rain trying to kind of hold on to his consciousness. Like this sense of, the heaviness and the pain and him realizing that he's like kind of bleeding out. I think it really works. There's kind of a lightness to the way that this particular panel is drawn here with Ichigo that really gets the sense of like almost like vision blurring. I don't know. It just works very, very well. I think the rain effects are also done very well through all of these panels, really, but especially here with Ichigo on the ground kind of bleeding out. I like that there are like this few places in his hair where it looks like it's like actually really kind of adhering to the pavement and sort of swashing out rather than just being drawn in a typical kind of spiky manner. Of course, Kisuke arrives, and as we come to learn, he is exactly who saves Ichigo. Might be easy to miss if you're just taking a glance at it, but there is Yorichi on his shoulder, which I think is pretty cute. As he, steps over Ichigo. It's kind of funny, he has his one robe on, but he has a raincoat on over that even, which is a bit cute, I suppose. And Ichigo, not even looking up or even aware of this, has this sensation that the rain stopped, right? And we'll revisit that later in the chapter and kind of get a little bit more information there. And that idea of the rain stopping will become a more significant line as we continue through this chapter. But I want you to kind of hold on to that and think about it. I also do like the way in which, we do get this full shot of Kisuke over Ichigo, and this really, like, this panel in general, I think it's, not only is it kind of well drawn, but it really kind of immediately tells us everything that we need to know, right? That Ichigo will be fine, that this person that, we know a lot about Kisuke, we know if anybody can probably save Ichigo right now, it's almost certainly Urahara. But, of course, we're getting into his world, right? We're getting to learn a little bit more. It's curious that Orihime, of all characters, I assume this is Orihime, right? You can't, oh yeah, she is. I was like, where are her hairbands? And they're actually back here at the ends of her, like, really cool braid kind of thing going on here. This is a neat look for her. Sadly, doesn't end up ever being. I don't think Orihime ever ends up having like braids in her hair. At the very least, I don't remember that ever being like a look for her early on outside of these chapter cover title things. But still, I do like using the chapter covers for those being a way to kind of explore the character looks or whatever. Oh, and by the way, I guess light spoilers on Orihime never getting a braid in her hair. Maybe she does, and I just don't remember. Anyway, um, regardless, pretty cool look from her. It is curious that she does show up on this chapter, this volume cover. Given that Orihime doesn't appear. I say volume cover. What am I saying? This uh, chapter cover art, right? I suppose because she's not in this chapter. She does not appear at all, and doesn't hold real significance here as far as we can tell. Now, it would have been kind of neat if, like, the healing that Ichigo underwent was revealed to have actually been her using the Shunshin Rika to like reverse the damage done to him, right? To reject it. I think that might have been kind of neat, but I don't think that's the case here. Anyway, I do like that we get these kind of black panels that fade out and kind of gradient to Ichigo waking up, and then we get, of course, the gag turn into him being face to face with Tessai. And then we get the reverse shot of Ichigo screaming as Tessai is like in the bed with him under the covers, making sure that he stays warm, of course, with his body heat. Um, yeah, I mean it's a kind of funny gag, I guess. Not what you expect, especially. I think you could talk about whether it works or not on the merits of like being like, oh man, he's just scared, like gay panic kind of stuff, like whatever. I think the funnier thing and the thing that makes this amusing for me is it's kind of the last thing you expect to come from all the seriousness of the previous like whole you know couple of chapters really, but especially where we were with Ichigo literally like bleeding out and dying, and so him coming to and this being like the kind of first thing he sees is humorous, especially the obscene reaction that Ichigo has. I think it also really kind of helps to break up the really dour, sort of somber atmosphere that we had built up and maybe lighten the mood a little bit as we have a sense of relief of Ichigo being alive, right? And we get a little bit of that sense of relief. Um, yeah, see, I think if, had Orihime used Shunshin Riki, he wouldn't have to have all these bandages, right? Because the wounds would just be literally like reversed. The event would be rejected. So, it's curious because we know that Urahara knows about Orihime's powers and that he's observed them and kind of how they work. And so that's potentially like if the idea was to maybe, and I've got to wonder if this is just an oversight or if it's I think on it or if it's just that Urahara really wants to kind of maneuver things into his own sort of training regimen, right? I certainly think it's Urahara putting in his own training regimen rather than just like a plot oversight. Because if Orihime can just deny the fact that Ichigo was wounded in this way, if she can reject those events, then couldn't she reject the whole idea of like him getting his soul sleep shattered and therefore losing his powers, right? Or at least access to any sort of his Reiatsu, his soul power or whatever it is, his spiritual energy. So I think the fact that maybe that hasn't come to pass is telling of Urahara having other things in plan. Again, I could be completely wrong. If it gets revealed that it was Shunshin Rika that she used to heal him, I will feel like a real dunce here, but I I don't think that's the case. I do think he was actually healed through other means, um, especially because they specifically talk about like, hey, your wounds have barely closed. They have them all bandaged up, etc., etc. I don't think this is just pageantry. Anyway, I think that the whoever was doing the typesetting for this, I assume that the original Japanese text was like kind of silly, but this particular font is, I think, a terrible font choice. Um, in general, I don't know. I think people have different takes whenever it comes to lettering, but I prefer my lettering to be entirely standardized across the board. Like bolding stuff is okay, and italicizing things I think is fine. But even then, I don't know, like because it's like, okay, well, how do you want to express a character, right? And it feels like font is kind of not an effective way to do that. Uh, Even if it does, immediately seem like it, just because I don't know. I feel like all the text itself should just read, legibly and straightforwardly. Having the heart at the end of what Kisuke is saying already gives us the sense that he's, kind of speaking in a playful way. You don't have to put it in a playful font as well, you know? Um, but maybe I consider lettering a little bit more seriously than most people. Most people are like, oh, it's just whatever. It doesn't really ruin it for me, but I do think like this particular font, especially because I think this is one that you can literally access in like MS Word. It's not like it's a unique font or anything, so it feels kind of amateurish for Viz to kind of to use this early on. But you know, different days in localization, I guess. This is several years ago, where it's a bit more professionally handled now. Um, I will say I wonder what the Japanese was, and like if the actual Japanese lettering was different and they were taking a cue off of that. But the font would not be the same, right? Because you can't really change the stroking, yeah, the stroking. You can't change that too much, right? So I don't know. I won't harp on it too much, but it does throw me for a loop, and I don't remember the font being changed like this before. Whenever Kisuke was kind of being playful, I do remember the hearts and stuff, but I think that's literally drawn in. Um, so yeah, it's a bizarre choice. Is ultimately where I come down to, and I don't think it really adds anything. It's anything. I think it's more distracting than not. Um, And I think like similarly, I'm fine with manga using like bolds and italics to sell like moments in tonality for a character, especially if you have an otherwise uniform bit of lettering. Um, Also, I'm typically a fan of all caps lettering because it's uniform. Every letter has the same top and bottom kind of segments. Whereas if you use lowercase, they can either be like a half figure, and they can even go underneath the line. Um, so as you see, like the L's here in Yule are like full height, but I don't think there's anything. Oh, the Y in U, right? It goes beneath the rest of the line. I don't know. I just find lowercase to be kind of ugly for that reason. If you're trying to make something in a visual medium like a comic, I prefer all caps lettering, and I think that tends to be a standard. If you'll look at the rest of the manga, we have that all caps lettering, right? So it is kind of annoying not only to get a font choice, but also a lowercase font choice. That's makes it a bit jarring. Um, yeah, yeah. I said I'd stop harping on the font stuff, but it really does bother me. But no, what I was saying with bold and italics, I think that works fine in manga because you don't have other indicators of tone as much, at least in English. In some languages, like I know Japanese has certain like sort of inflectory words or like suffix prefixes, things like that. So there's ways in which you can convey sort of tone or rudeness or frustration with certain ways that you can arrange your sentence. But then also, obviously, you have the context from like the actual scene that's drawn, but you don't have any other sort of descriptors for you. So I think it's fine to use bold or italics in a comic or manga, whereas in a book, like in an actual narrative, which I have a lot more familiarity with, I tend to find it kind of cheap there too, because it's like, okay, well, if you want a character to have a certain inflection, rather than implying that with italics or bolded words, trying to put emphasis on like a certain word. There's ways that you can write that end up way more like that literally punctuated better, if that makes sense. So I don't know. I have a lot of particulars whenever it comes to the written word, probably because I've spent most of my life caring about that kind of thing and studying it and doing a good deal of writing myself. Um, so the way in which things read is important to me. And getting back to that, let's talk about how this reads. I do like that Urahara is we get this full shot of him, now kind of coming towards us, and he's got the fan out. He's got a big smile. He's looking kind of goofy. I do like the ways in which Urahara is presented, and that they really quickly switch from him being kind of friendly and silly, all kind of almost cartoonish, to being this very serious character, and we get a couple of different expressions and faces from him throughout this chapter. So we do have this moment where Urahara presents like, didn't you want to be saved? And Ichigo really thinks back to, like that moment whenever Rukia left, and him being really frustrated with being put in the same kind of moment of his mother's death, right? That inability to protect somebody else, and that frustration that he had with himself, and that sort of blaming himself and feeling very upset about it. So the idea of like, didn't you want to be saved? It's like, well, to an extent, yeah, but also I feel so terrible. You might as well have not saved me. Maybe this is what I deserve. Who knows? Certainly, that's the mindset that Rukia was in, right? That like, she deserved this fate of hers, and didn't you want to be saved? Is a pertinent question here, because it's like, well, does Rukia want to be saved, right? She certainly told Ichigo not to come after her, but a lot of that was to protect Ichigo, right? That she didn't want him doing something stupid and reckless and getting himself killed. But it seems like Urahara has different plans, right? I like that Ichigo does bring up Ishida Uryu being there, because I thought about that quite a lot in the previous chapter. I was like, is Ishida just laying on the ground, bleeding out 5 feet away from Ichigo? Like, yeah, bro, this sucks, because we don't really see him after the fight starts to escalate, right? But I like that Ichigo brings that up, and we actually get a pretty great scene from Ishida. We get that he, mentioned that he went home. He was able to be healed on the spot, and this is yet again another reason why I think Urahara healed Ichigo with like, Kido or some other means rather than using Orihime's powers, because he mentions, I was able to heal him on the spot in relation to uh, Uryu, and talks about like the severity of his wounds, right? Yeah, I like that we get this kind of parts of the black background that indicate these places that are in flashback, and then a little bit of white down here. It actually kind of works, and it looks a little bit stylistic in a way that I like. But I do like that we get this moment of Ishida being worried about Ichigo, and really kind of expressing that Ichigo should be taken care of, and that you know he really, like, in a lot of ways, wants Ichigo to save Rukia, and knows that Rukia, or that Ichigo is the one that's going to be capable of it, especially after seeing everything that transpired that night, right? So we get this real sense that Ishida's frustrated with his own powerlessness and inability to kind of do anything. Anyway, of course, I like this shot in particular, especially coming off of like this Ishida with this clenched fist, the rain kind of dripping down from it, as well as the blood, I think is fantastic. And then we drop into this panel, and I love the way in which it's kind of skewed with Ichigo down here, Urahara up here, kind of divided into fourths, right? Ichigo on our bottom right, Urahara on our top left. Just effective blocking, I think. But then also, I love the way that, like, the room, we get this kind of strange angle of the room that really gives Kisuke sort of looming over Ichigo in this way, being this kind of large in life character. And yeah, it's a cool moment as Ichigo kind of reflects on this, and I think we really get the sense of him being reflective with like the art kind of being given a softer take here, and all of this sort of gradient fading to white as he remembers Rukia traversing to the Soul Society. And then, of course, he reflects on that and he gets frustrated because, like, how is he going to get a Soul Society, right? How is he meant to save Rukia? You know, she's beyond his reach now, right? Um, and this is where, of course, Kisuke gets pretty serious. I do like that we get this shot of Kisuke with the door behind him, especially whenever he presented the entire metaphor of the door with Chad and Orihime, right? This idea that he could lead them to the door, but it's up for them, give them the keys, and even they could even open it and see, what would be on the other side, but it's up to them to actually cross that threshold. And I think that it's no surprise that this is kind of being reiterated here with Kisuke really doing the same thing for Ichigo. This is something that like Kubo really loves to do. I love like I you'll notice this here, and I think this is maybe the first time that it's happened in the manga. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is something that I'll try to point out whenever it does happen because it is a kind of narrative thing that Kubo does a lot, where for like this very shocking or surprising moment for a character, another character will phrase things in this way of a question, right? So we get this like, do you really think there's no way to get to the Soul Society? And like that being framed as a question is like a hypothetical, right? It's like, of course there's a way to get to the Soul Society. Urahara like presenting that is the reveal that of course there is a way, but it's framed as like this kind of question, right? This rhetorical, not hypothetical, rhetorical kind of question, because clearly Urahara knows a way to get there. um and I think you kind of using that sort of questioning device, like, do you really think this? Uh, it's meant to really maybe highlight these characters as being like, oh, they have this knowledge that you don't have. Do you really believe this sort of uninformed thing? Um, you know, who told you X, Y, Z? All of that sort of stuff, right? Uh, and I'm trying to think about the previous battle if because like Renji was like asked, do you know the name of your Zanpakuto, but he didn't really do like uh do you really think Zanpakuto don't have a name or anything like that. So it wasn't quite from the same way, but we'll see um this sort of questioning thing, and this being used to really not just sell a certain character that's giving a reveal as being more knowledgeable, but also as being a kind of shocking moment because it's not just speaking to the character, it's usually speaking to us, the reader, as well, right? um, so if we considered Soul Society itself to be some place that regular souls couldn't get to unless they passed on, we're being told otherwise, right? I don't think this one is as shocking for us as it is for Ichigo, but you know, is what it is, right? Um, I like that Ichigo gets very excited and Kisuke keeps this kind of cool and proposes this sort of training regimen, um, which only gets Ichigo more frustrated because he feels like, yeah, the one, there isn't time, and then two, how's someone like Kisuke going to teach Ichigo how to fight, right? Because Ichigo, he knows how to fight. What is this guy who's never been involved in a single fight as far as Ichigo's seen, right? Of course, Ichigo comes to learn pretty quickly that Kisuke hasn't been getting involved on his own decision, not because he's incapable of it, right? I also love that we do get these very stark like changes in expression from both Ichigo, and then Kisuke sort of is drawn in this way that he's much more serious or silent in these moments of Ichigo's outbursts. Of course, pushing him to the floor with his cane, and we get yet again. I mentioned this with Chad, but the idea Kubo kind of likes this idea of having this character with their face sort of enshrouded, so that whenever you do see their eyes, you can have these sorts of serious moments. I think that's entirely what's happening here, as we get the shot of Kisuke kind of looking down on Ichigo and telling him that if he just runs in, he will get killed. Um, Pretty good stuff. I think it's really effectively sells Kisuke as having these moments of seriousness, of kind of the whole like goofy shopkeeper thing being a persona or like a front that he puts up, kind of the way that he is whenever things are lightweight, but this is kind of more who he is, right? This more serious guy. Um, I do like that we get Renji with the scar on his chin, A+, as we're presented by Kuwa and Renji once more. And yet again, I think Kuwa really doing a great job of depicting their expressions as being so different from each other. Even where we're only getting maybe half their faces here, we can still very easily just tell them by like their expression alone, not even the other defining features of like their hair or Renji tattoos or whatever. um of course, Ichigo gets the sensation that Urahara is putting a weapon at him, which is pretty cool. I like that the panel here kind of extends down into the panel below, without having to connect and be like this awkward Tetris jigsaw piece. Like it still works as a rectangular panel, but also it extends into the next one. Clever use of the paneling, I think, especially to sell this all in scale. Um, I like that, we get Yurichi standing there. We know that Yurichi could speak. And in fact, whenever I was reading this, I was like, wait, is this still Kisuke talking? And I'm like, oh, well, it must be. But Yurichi is here to witness this as well. Um, but yeah, we get this very serious moment from Kisuke, right? Where we haven't really heard Kisuke saying things like, this would be suicide, don't make me laugh, things like that. Kind of not playing around with Ichigo whatsoever, but having this really intense moment with him, because it's clear that Kisuke wasn't kind of getting through with the way that he was talking to Ichigo earlier, and here we get the other eye, um, as we're seeing him from below. So yet again, more kind of dramatic reveals. Fantastic use of like the shading here too. I think it's all good stuff. Yeah, and the reverse shot of Ichigo as he's on the ground, kind of realizing that he would have just been rushing into his death. Um, Here, I don't know that it's absolutely bizarre that we get some translations for things, and otherwise some other things are left in the Japanese, but it's like not consistent with what we would get moving forward. So, like I said, Reiatsu and Reishi are both pretty big ones. So, like, spiritual particles as well as spirit pressure. So, like, Reiatsu is your spiritual power, right? Which is different from spiritual pressure, which is the pressure everybody else feels from the density of the Reiatsu or whatever. Um, and then Reishi are the actual spiritual particles. That's what Quincy draw in to use for their attacks. So, to basically fuel their bow or whatever. So, like, it's interesting that sort of stuff doesn't get translated on, and I like that early on. If you go back to those first chapters, even then it's like the dark power or whatever, because they really didn't know how they wanted to translate Reiatsu, I suppose. But yeah, there's stuff like this, like a capital offender, Kyokushu, which is like you didn't need to leave that in Japanese. You could have just been like, look, they generally wait a month before executing, a felon, right? Just use like the appropriate like words. You don't need to keep it as Kyokushu, like unless Kyokushu as a concept is unique to like the sort of Bleach terminology. So it's yet another time that I feel like the localization team really is whiffing it here, which is rough. I think so far the localization, we've had a few hiccups with it, but ultimately, it's been for the most part on point. But I will point out points like this where it feels inconsistent or like there's something that's not really well handled. I like again that we get these shots of Urahara kind of again being like standing much taller and above the situation that Ichigo is down on the ground, but we also get these shots from Urahara from above or from below, never like straight on. So we're always seeing him as this kind of looming figure rather than as one that is on equal standing with anybody, literally or otherwise. But it provides a lot of really cool angles to see him from. Whereas Ichigo, we typically see Ichigo like straight on, which I think is pretty cool because we're supposed to kind of identify with Ichigo and see him as our gateway into this world, right? He is more or less the pier for which we can peer into the series, regardless of how much we relate to him, right? He is our main character. He is the vessel for the narrative. I like that Kisuke does break down that, he'll have, essentially with 30 days, that gives him 10 days for training, 7 days to open up the gates of Soul Society, and 13 days for the rescue. So, plenty of time, right? Kind of interesting if you consider, that all the chapters in Bleach so far have been basically over the course of 2 months. So it proposes that the entire next arc might be over just the course of a singular month, which is wild to think about. But it's kind of that's the one of the crazy things about Bleach is like it can feel like a lot more happens because it's over the course of hundreds and hundreds of chapters, but in general it kind of keeps a pretty consistent and pretty small timeline. Like I said, like the last 55 chapters, which is over a year of like manga publication, that all happened within 2 months within the world of Bleach. So it's something to consider. Some manga do actually like traverse time pretty effectively. Others, they'll tell a whole story that takes place within, just maybe even a week. Who knows? So I think Bleach does a decent job at like at least tracking it for you and keeping good reminders of it. But it can be easy to forget. Like Ichigo is 15. It's just like, geez, that's wild. Um, I like the shot of Kisuke kind of looking up and saying, "Of course," while Ichigo looks down and he's kind of listening to this, just like the reverse of the two, as they're sort of in conversation here. I also enjoy this idea that if you wholeheartedly want to kind of go into this, if your resolve is 100%, then it'll be fine. Like you've got this power, you'll be able to do it. But if you don't, well then you know you're probably gonna die. But yeah, I like that we finally get this kind of culmination of everything that Kisuke's been plotting here. I love this zoom into him as he sort of lifts his head, and we finally see him head on as he expresses kind of maybe the most honest thing that he's said so far in the manga, which is that for the next 2 days he's going to put Ichigo through the ringer. So he's really going to give him a very difficult training regimen. And if we can tell from everything that Kisuke's been okay with putting Ichigo up against so far, um, this is pretty extreme, right? What does Kisuke consider through the ringer if he thinks it's, perfectly fine for Ichigo to go toe to toe with a Minos? Or if he's like, oh yeah, I let you go fight those guys so that you could see that it would be suicide to run into Soul Society. It's like, were you really like Byakuya and Renji who laid Ichigo out that easily? Like they could have murdered him, but you let him go and do that as like a lesson. Um, so clearly, Kisuke puts a lot of faith into Ichigo, and you have to wonder how much of that is like, well, if things go poorly for Ichigo, is Kisuke really willing to jump in or save the day or patch things up, or is Kisuke going to just kind of wash his hands of it and be like, well, he shouldn't have done that. I don't know. Like it's unclear here, right? But you get the sense that yeah, things are about to get even more dire for Ichigo as he's going to put through these sorts of life or death training. I like that Ichigo, of course, doesn't have to think about it very much, right? That like he's like, well, if I'm the only person who could do this, then yeah, let's do it. Uh, we get this very kind of strong expression from Ichigo, and we return to that phrase, right? We see Ruki is standing there as the clouds have parted. We get this kind of swept clouds of Bleach that we've seen before, but here with the lines, the rain has stopped, reiterated, and so I think in a lot of ways this gives it a lot more emotional weight because now it's like okay, well Ichigo has faith again in the fact that he can actually save somebody, that he can make things right, and so the rain stopping is more metaphorical now. It's no longer the idea of like okay, Kisuke walks over him with an umbrella, the rain is literally stopped, but more metaphorically, whenever Kisuke shows up to save Ichigo, the rain had stopped because Kisuke was allowing him to regain his power, to actually, have the strength to save Rukia and be the kind of person that he wants to be, right? Um, but if we think about it even in the broader scope, right, where it was raining on the day that his mother was killed, the idea of stopping the rain, of the rain being kind of like this emotional downpour at one's inability to kind of change these natural forces in the world, right? That like it's like oh well I can't hold back all the rain, like who could? It's literally a force of nature. But the idea that you are something could come to pass that actually clears that up and makes things better. For Ichigo, it's like obtaining this power, right? It's being able to affect this change. It's being able to actually protect people and save lives. It speaks to exactly his core kind of interest as a main character. What's really motivating him and driving him, and so the rain kind of having this more metaphorical thing being tied to both the loss of his mother and the basically the loss of his own life and Rukia, which was happening, just earlier, and that in a lot of ways, it is through Rukia and through Kisuke that Ichigo will be able to essentially the rain will end, right? The rain will stop, right? That he will actually be able to have the sort of power that he needed to have to save his mother, and that he needed to have now to save Rukia, and that in the future he may need to have to save anybody else. So it's Ichigo really being able to actualize uh, those sorts of things that he's always sort of wanted. Whew, yeah. So good bit going on there. Of course, um, we get Kon that's remarking on the fact that Kisuke had to show up clearly and take Ichigo's body because now Ichigo is back in his physical body. Um, if you do remember, like there was mention that the wounds that you have on your spiritual self do transfer over to your physical self whenever you are put back into your physical body. I wonder, because the soul chain was severed, so you've got to wonder, I guess Kisuke had some way to amend that. Um, and I do think, of course, of Orihime as perhaps being one of those ways, but then she would have maybe mended all of his wounds, and therefore it's like, well, then what would have transferred over to his physical body anyway? So I think Girahara just has his own methods of revival, basically, which is maybe why he's not too frustrated about, or not doesn't care too much about sending Ichigo to go and fight Renji and Byakuya as a lesson. All in all, I think this is a fantastic chapter. I really like where the previous one leaves us off on, like kind of ending this whole arc and really bringing us to this moment of, oh man, the main character is going to die. What's going on? Like this is such a dramatic turn of events where we really see Ichigo suffer like a crippling loss. Um, and like how he's going to come back from that, how is he going to gain, the sort of power that he would need to actually affect anything or even overcome Byakuya. And it's like, well, clearly your heart is the way, right? And we kind of knew that before. All we had all those sort of set up and building blocks for it, but it is cool that this immediately delivers on that, and that this ultimately I think builds up this real sense of the emotional sort of connection that Ichigo has to this journey and to Rukia and to gaining this power, right? I think that's one of the things that a lot of manga maybe mess up, or at least a lot of shonen manga, is that you often have to wonder, like, why is the main character pursuing so much power? And it's like, why are they capable of becoming so strong or capable, right? What's really driving them towards that? And how sensible is it? And for Ichigo, it makes a lot of sense because he has this heavy trauma tied to being powerless. And I think a lot of times that's usually what a shonen manga will do. Alternatively, they'll have a lot of the main character sort of not really wanting to abuse that power, but realizing that it's like necessary for them to have it. Or I think more interesting ones add some complications there, right? But yeah, and I love that the beginning of this chapter really highlights, all the things that are kind of associated with the rain here for Ichigo, right? This like unstopping bleeding, this heaviness and this cold, this pain, um, all of that sort of pulled into this sense of the rain because it rained, then whenever his mother died, and it rained here again whenever he is dying, and he was unable to save Rukia, right? And it rained also on the day with Grand Fisher as well. Whenever, sure, he was able to deal a grievous wound with Grand Fisher, but he was also put pretty close to dying as well. We also get this reiteration of interruption, right? So the previous one being like broken coda, and here we get July rain interrupted. And so the idea of like this sort of finale or of the rain that being interrupted, of there being a turnabout, is interesting. So for the broken coda, I definitely read that more as like, okay, well, Ichigo's going to have this kind of climactic battle and be able to sort of prevent Rukia from this inevitable execution that we've been moving towards this entire time. And broken coda is really that sort of triumphant finale being shattered and Ichigo being left for dead, right? And then July Rain interrupted is like, all of the pain that comes with all of that, and literally the rain like stopping, right? It being interrupted by Kisuke's intervention and by Ichigo being really driven and motivated to save Rukia. So it's cool that we get those sort of parallels there. Um, Yeah, and I think ultimately, like, this chapter does a lot of things to build Kisuke up effectively. I mean, we've gotten a lot of him before, and I don't think this chapter would work as well if we hadn't seen what we had seen of Kisuke before, and those few glimpses at him being more serious. And so, like, this all reads really effectively. It doesn't really like there are times in which a series will have a gag character, and then all of a sudden they're badass, and you're like, you might laugh at it or you might think it's like really cool, but like there needs to be proper moments whenever that character can be serious so that like that serious moment kind of feels a little more organic, I think. And so Kisuke showing these sides of him beforehand in less dramatic ways till now, and then having kind of more dramatized versions of both now works, I think, in a lot of ways. It cranks those character traits a little bit up more, but I think it's effective here to really sell the severity of this moment, right? And what would need to come to pass for Ichigo to save Rukia. So, all in all, I think it's a good chapter. I think it builds, again, the forward momentum of the series, which that's something that I always like in a chapter. I think the worst chapters of a series just kind of stagnate and sit there, and they don't really build anything meaningful. They don't introduce anything new or interesting. They don't, recontextualize something that you already knew. They don't present any new information, and they don't do anything interesting with our old information, right? Um, but these early chapters of Bleach all do a very good job of constantly doing that, of constantly building this momentum towards new events, towards what's going to happen next. So now we already have in our mind this entire like connection, not just of this emotional sort of connection that Ichigo has of the rain stopping, and that's a whole thing. But then we also have this idea that, like, just narratively, he's going to be training through very, very hard training in the next couple of days. That he's going to go to Soul Society, so we have that to look forward to. Should he even get through this training? We have a lot of things to look forward to that have been promised to us, both literally on the page, but also implied. And so that's cool. I like that. I like whenever a series is able to do that, and even more so, I like whenever a series delivers on that. I think that one of the frustrations a lot of people have is that a lot of series are very good at promising things, but not so much good at delivering them, and that can be a kind of important thing. I will say, as we sort of wrap here, one big thing with this to talk about is obviously we're coming to the end of the first arc of Bleach, which is the Substitute Soul Reaper arc, the Substitute Shinigami arc. You could maybe consider it ended with this chapter. I would say not really until they actually, do a couple of other things first. You have the rest of this volume to close out. And I don't know if the actual chapters or the actual volume says that it ends that arc right there or not, or if that's just kind of an unofficial thing. But anyway, point being that we're coming to the end of this arc and we're transferring over to the next one. And one of the big things that comes with that is that there is a kind of structural change where the first arc of Bleach, this Substitute Shinigami arc, has a lot of these sort of monster of the week. We've got to fight these hollows situations. It's building up its cast, and it's building up this larger world. And I think for a lot of people that enjoyed that, it can make reading the rest of Bleach a little bit harder as it transfers into doing some different things, to kind of changing up its, like, not its narrative structures, because it still does a lot of the same sort of beat by beat things. And like I always was saying before, I think Kubo's really aware of the sort of structure that he's presenting and how he's manipulating that structure to provide satisfying or interesting outcomes. But just having that sense of, like, okay, well, it's smaller scale, it's monster of the week. If we're going to be going to Soul Society, then obviously we're not going to have these sorts of supernatural things happening in this urban environment, like in like this real world sort of situation. So that's going to be different, should that come to pass. But like, there's just a big transition into it being a bit different. I'm not going to say that's necessarily a bad thing, or that those people are wrong for like liking this earlier stuff but not liking the later stuff, because it is like a departure. I feel in a lot of ways that Bleach's different arcs have different strengths and weaknesses, and I think one of the strengths of the first arc of Bleach is that it does have so much of that forward momentum. But a lot of that is in, like, a lot of what works for me and what I personally enjoy is that it's building this larger world and building these larger conflicts that are going to pay off in these later arcs. And then, I like that we get to go and see that and do that in those later arcs, right? So I'm fine. Like, I like this as what it builds, but on its own, like, I think there's certain people that certainly like the build up more than the payoff, maybe. There's always going to be somebody that's like, oh, I wish this would have played out differently. Are there, like, not every single little thing got paid off? Because, that's the problem with writing fiction, is that, like, the more characters and the more elements you introduce, all of a sudden there's infinitely more things to actually, like, pay off, even if they aren't things that you weren't really focusing on in your series. This happens with, any sort of media that people indulge, but you hear about it all the time. Like, oh man, I wish this character would have gotten more screen time, or I wish I could have seen what had happened to these characters whenever they got older. It's like what fan fiction entirely is. It's all just people imagining these sorts of things, and a lot of people like to use that as a point of complaint, right? Where they're like, okay, I'm frustrated that we didn't get to know, you know, the nature of these characters' relationship, or I'm frustrated we didn't get to see what this character's power was, or it's annoying that we didn't get to know what was in that treasure chest, right? Like that there are these mysteries that are presented, or maybe even questions that people might have that might arise organically, but they don't get answered within the series, just because that wasn't within the scope of the series. It wasn't what the focus of the narrative was on. And I think it's fine for the focus of the narrative not to answer every question. In fact, I think that's good. Um, for me, those things don't bother me as much, because if you actually care about that sort of stuff, and if you're questioning it and you're that invested, like, it means that the narrative was able to grip you enough and build its world well enough and build its characters in an interesting enough way that you wanted to see more out of them, that you can imagine all these different scenarios. Yeah, they didn't come to pass, but I think potential is always tends to be more interesting than payoff, unless you're really good at payoff. Because potential. Then it's like, well, if you build a potential, then the person's always going to be able to fulfill that potential with whatever satisfies them the most in their imagination. Whereas whenever you have a concrete payoff for a thing, or no payoff for a thing, which is often what happens for a lot of things that people see as potential within a series, then that ends up being kind of a downer for people, because they're forced to grapple with the reality of the situation, right? That like the potential in some ways could maybe feel wasted, especially if it's not up to somebody's standards, or doesn't surprise them sufficiently, or doesn't feel effectively paid off, or paid off at all. I think this happens to a lot of people, and not just with media. I mean, it happens with relationships all the time, right? People get into relationships because there's potential in another person. There's all these, different things that other person could be, and then as you come to understand the reality of them, and as you start to realize, what the actual future for you and this other person might hold, the actual payoff for that potential, the reality of the other person, and the reality of, what your relationship might look like together, comes into light. And some people, they build up such an imagination of what could have been, or who this other person could have been, that whenever their fantasy doesn't really align with the reality, that causes them to be frustrated with the whole situation and usually distance themselves from people, right? That's why you have honeymoon periods. But I think the same thing happens with media, right? Where things build really effective potential because it's easy to build potential, or at least easier. Um, but like, there's plenty of stuff that just fails to be evocative whatsoever. And so I think one of the things that works for me about Bleach is that it is very evocative, that it builds a lot of this potential, but it also delivers on a lot of it. So I can't really fault Bleach for not living up to its potential. If anything, I think, one of the things that it does best is being very, very evocative, being the sort of series where, all these characters you could think of, like, these kind of rich histories and backgrounds, because we're given just enough to latch on to. But I can talk about that forever. Let's talk about spoilers, right? I do think this is a fantastic chapter through and through. Really good way to follow up the previous one. Yeah, it's good stuff. I do have some of those issues with typesetting, but otherwise, I think it's fine. I wish that Orihime and Chad maybe would have been addressed a little bit, like in this chapter. But I get a feeling that we'll eventually address them in another chapter forward anyway, because we know that Kisuke gathered them all up after their fights, after they had collapsed. Anyway, moving forward, talking about spoilers, because there are a few, and we're already running up on an hour for this video. Oh me, oh my. So, of course, this moment, I had to really think about this. Whenever Kisuke shows up with the other cloak on over his shoulders, and like that, like, raincoat, and I really do have to read it as a raincoat. There is part of me that wants to read it as that invisibility cloak that he had, right? If you think about and turn back the pendulum, how he was able to kind of mask his presence, or Aizen was able to do that too. I believe that they had this sort of invisibility cloak thing going on. I think that would have been an interesting way for him to kind of keep Byakuya and Renji from really realizing that he is there, right? But no, I just read this as a normal raincoat. So shame, but is what it is. I do like that Yurichi is there, nevertheless. Um, Obviously, the idea of stopping the rain having this really emotional connection to Ichigo is something that we would continue to see, especially in his inner world, right? We get a little bit of that with Zangetsu talking about like whenever the rain stopped. And it's interesting that old man Zangetsu talks about that a lot, especially because it's connected to his Quincy powers, which he gets from his mom, and the rain being like such a kind of traumatic thing for Ichigo, especially whenever you consider his connection to his mom, right? Don't know why Orihime's here. Just to remind me that she exists so that I can think that Shunshin Rika got used. Of course, we get Tessai here waking Ichigo up. So whenever I was thinking about this, right, why wasn't Orihime's power just used on Ichigo to reverse the event? And I gotta figure again, like I said before, that it's because Urahara really wants to put Ichigo through his particular training program, because that's the only way that Ichigo is going to realistically get powers of his own and get to be a hollow awakened hybrid thing anyway, which I feel like was always part of Kisuke's plan. So, what are you gonna do? Right? Clearly, relying on Rukia's lifted powers is not going to be enough. Anyway, kind of interesting. We get this moment where, I guess I have to go forward a little bit. There's going to be a couple of other things to talk about before I get to what I was thinking right then, which is stuff about Benihime. But, I like that he mentions that he healed Uryu, and that, interesting that it's like, okay, he wandered home, right? He went home, but we know that like his family runs the largest hospital in Karakura, so like it makes perfect sense that he would be like, okay, well, yeah, still injured. I patched him up a little bit, but then he was like, I'll be fine, and he went home. It's like, well, yeah, because he could just go to the hospital there, which I think is kind of cute to think about. But really, here I think this is him realizing that he's going to have to practice a lot more, right? That he's going to have to train to become capable, and that training is going to be the sort of thing that he will have to undergo with the what is it? The Let's Steel, right? The glove that he ends up getting. I'm trying to think of what it's called, but it's not coming to me. Anyway, as we know, Ishida does plenty off screen himself. Anyway, um, of course, this framing of the question, do you really think there's no way to get to the Soul Society? Whenever I'm talking about that, I was imagining, all the times that Aizen would say, have some sort of reveal, right? Since when were you under the impression that, I hadn't hypnotized you, all of that sort of thing. Or like, when who told you that the Espada go from 1 to 10, et cetera, et cetera. Those sorts of big kind of reveals in Bleach always get framed that same sort of way. So this really is the beginning of that. Surprising that we get that from, it's something that's so associated with Aizen especially, but the first time we really get that here is from Kisuke. So kind of cute connection between those characters, that they really do have a lot of similarities, more than you might expect. Yeah. So here, of course, there's this reiteration that, he'd be killed if he has to fight them. Yeah. Does seem to be the case anyway, even with this training. But the idea of this sword pointing over him is, as we come to find out, that of course Benihime is the cane, right? That it's the sword cane. Um, and I was going to mention, I think that's actually kind of clever because Benihime is all about repurposing the structure of a thing, and so it itself is a sword that's been repurposed into a cane. I think that is just like a neat kind of connection between its Bankai power and its regular, unsealed design. I think that's, pretty cute. It's kind of like with we get that with a couple of character swords actually. Not all of them, but we certainly see that with what is it? Gins, right? With the Wakizashi, because it helps put even more distance between him and his opponent or whatever. That he has a short sword, but it kind of is very quick and he can unsheath it very quickly and use it very quickly, right? There's a couple of other ones that are that way, but I'm not gonna sit here and think of every single Zanpakuto where the unsealed state really does a good job to reflect kind of some aspect of it, other than just kind of basic design stuff. Like Renzi's has the spikies on it, and his sword has the spikies. you know. Anyway, um, yeah. Of course, the interesting thing is, like, using this idea of using another person as an excuse to kill yourself, and do you really want to be saved? And Ichigo kind of being in a self-sacrificial place is interesting to think about, because I think about, like, whenever he goes to save Orihime, right? And it's like, is he really using that as an excuse to fight Grimjow, right? Because Grimjow is the one that shows up and defeats him during the invasion and, like, really pummels the shit out of Ichigo. And so it's like, how much is that, like, Ichigo using that as an excuse to, fulfill all these other sort of things and to feel more powerful and to feel more valid or whatever. I don't know. Let me know if what you think on that one. Of course, do tag any spoilers that you have in the comments as spoilers. But I'm curious what other people's thoughts are on that. Yeah, so interesting here that they're like, okay, well, they wait a month before executing a criminal. So again, I'm wondering what the heck Renji's line about getting 20 years added to her sentence was, thrown out there for no good reason. She'll get executed 20 years stronger. What is the deal? Anyway, I like that the idea of, his resolve being kind of important here. Of course, that was one of the kind of first things that we saw in the battle against Acid Wire, that Ichigo's resolve literally could affect the power of his spiritual pressure, right? That his Reiatsu and, like, his sword was able to cut more efficiently whenever he had more resolve, rather than it being half-hearted. So I like that kind of gets reiterated here, the importance of Ichigo's resolve, and that being immediately kind of conflated with being a power stronger than iron. I think that's fantastic. Yeah. Of course, I don't have much else to say otherwise, other connections to kind of make. I do like the idea of, like, all the rain stuff moving forward obviously continues to get used. That metaphor continues to be kind of important to Ichigo. But yeah, I think that's it really for these sorts of connections, right? I don't have any other ones here. I can think of maybe, like, stopping the rain, especially thinking in maybe relation to Yuha, right? Because essentially he is the one that brought the rain in the first place, but I can't see really that many other connections here that way. Yeah, so if you see any other connections, please let me know. If there's anything else here that you think connects to the rest of Bleach in some kind of really significant way. Obviously, there's, like, the really, clear ones. Like, yeah, Ichigo's going to train, and he's going to be put through the ringer, and then he's going to go Soul Society. Like, we know all that stuff. But I mean, like, other sort of larger sort of thematic or narrative connections that might not be as easily parsed out. I would like to know if you see anything there, or if you'd like to talk more about any of the ones that I brought up. Anyway, this has been Bleach Revisited. This has been Carker Gold, your host, reminding you that, as always, spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.